Today we're going to continue an examination of Proverbs. We're hitchhiking on what Jacob has already laid a foundation for. Your homework assignment, per se, was to read chapters 10 through 15. Now, hopefully that wasn't too taxing on you. There's really not a lot of length to those chapters, but they give you a good insight as to what the Proverbs are and how they sound and so forth and so on. In fact, one of the things that I learned early on was that there are how many chapters in Proverbs? 31. So if you want to do a daily devotional on your own, you could read a chapter of Proverbs every day of the month, since there are 31 chapters and some months have 31 days. So it's a good way to have a devotional time with God. But as we look at the examination of the Proverbs, my first question to you is, what is a proverb? Now, Jacob may have covered this thoroughly, but this would then be review. But I have here that a proverb is and this is where you're going to have to start filling in the blanks. A proverb is a short, pithy. Don't you love that word? Pithy? Pithy basically means full of vigor or substance. Okay, that's all it means. So it's a short, pithy saying centering on or in a comparison or antithesis. That's antithesis. Antithesis. Yes, I can. This part or its spelling? Okay, yeah. ANTI. And then the word thesis. THESIS. Mm-hmm. So it's a comparison or antithesis that strikes the ear and arrests the attention. So these are supposed to be attention getters. These were made popular long before you went to Panda Express and got those cookies, which are completely meaningless in comparison to what we're talking about today. But still, this is a good kind of a proverb that we're studying here. To the Hebrew, a proverb meant more than just a short saying. It included discourses and sentences as well as expressions that might be considered a proverb. So a proverb didn't always have to be something that was da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da-da. It wasn't always that short. Sometimes they would build many different discussions on one proverb, and you had to go through those discourses. Because Solomon was the prototype of Israel's wise man, remember, he was the one who could ask God for anything, and he asked for wisdom. So because he's the prototype of Israel's wise man, he was the principal contributor, and then the Hebrew title of the book is, Jacob, can you pronounce that for me properly, please? Yeah, Mishle Shlomo. Parables of Solomon. So if you were to look at this in the Hebrew Bible, that's the title that it would give for this book. However, the English title of the book is derived from the Latin Liber Proverbiorum, or Book of Proverbs. And so that's where we got our title in our English Bible. Welcome. So now my next question to us is, why do we have them? Why are they in the Bible? Mm-hmm. They are. Proverbs provides God's detailed, here we go, instructions. You got that one?
I did.
Good for you. So far you got an A+. Proverbs provides God's detailed instructions for his people to deal successfully with the practical affairs of everyday life. That is, it tells us how to relate to God. The next blank there, parents, children. The next blank, neighbors. Oh, don't you love that one? And last but not least, the most popular one, and government. Thunderous applause all across the room for that one. So these are important to us. In our English Bible, Proverbs is directly followed by the book of Ecclesiastes, also written by Solomon. Now, the theme of the book of Ecclesiastes is, can anybody tell me what that word is?
Depression.
What is it?
Depression.
Well, maybe so, but
It's very depressing, a lot of it.
we're getting there, yeah. Life is meaningless. We use the word vanity. If you read the King James Bible, it says, vanity of vanity, all is vanity. So that's what the theme of the book of Ecclesiastes is, vanity, the futility of trying to find purpose and fulfillment in life apart from God, the giver of life. So if God has created us and He's created us with a purpose, then if we are trying to accomplish things on our own without His help or insight, that would be vanity or vain, pointless. Perhaps it would be more fitting if Ecclesiastes actually preceded Proverbs, as it is an appropriate introduction for the book of the Proverbs. He directs those who would escape the devious paths that he had himself, we're talking about Solomon, had trodden to the consideration of the collection of Proverbs which he had sought out and set in order. So let's look at Ecclesiastes 12. So if you have a Bible, let's turn there. Maybe you have a phone with the Bible app on it. But we're going to look at Ecclesiastes 12, 8 through 14 to help us to understand this little idea. 8 through 14. Let me read for you and you can follow along. Starting in verse 8, absolute futility, which means the same thing as vanity, says the teacher. Everything is futile. In addition to the teacher being a wise man, he constantly taught the people knowledge. He weighed, explored, and arranged many proverbs. The teacher sought to find delightful sayings and write words of truth accurately. The sayings of the wise are like cattle prods, and those from masters of collections are like firmly embedded nails. The sayings are given by one shepherd. But beyond these, my son, be warned, there is no end to the making of many books, and much study wearies the body. When all has been heard, the conclusion of the matter is this: fear God and keep His commands, because this is for all humanity. For God will bring every act to judgment, including every hidden thing, whether good or evil. Now, doesn't that sound like a good preview to the Proverbs?
Which version are you reading from?
I'm reading from the Coleman Standard Bible. If you think of Solomon being the teacher in verse 9, being a wise man, look at his description. He constantly taught the people knowledge. That's what the book of Proverbs is all about. He weighed, explored, and arranged many, here's that word, proverbs. So again, Ecclesiastes 12 finishes up, but it's really a good introduction to the whole book of Proverbs. That was just a little tidbit outside of the book of Proverbs, out of our scope of study this morning, so you didn't have to pay for that. That was just freebie extras, okay? But what lessons can we learn from Solomon in these verses in preparing to examine the wisdom God gave him? I don't want you to have to spend too much time, but maybe just a few minutes. Some of those different things that I just read in Ecclesiastes 12 in those verses, what lessons can be learned from Solomon? Write down his description there in those verses of some of the things that we can examine that helps us to understand the wisdom that God gave him.
Fear God and obey His commands.
Pardon?
Fear God and obey His commands.
That would be one of the good lessons.
Study too hard and work too hard because it'll just wear you out. Relax, fear God and obey His commands.
Anything we do on our own is meaningless.
That's true.
How to live a good life.
How to live a good life? What does verse 9 tell us? Why did he write these down? To give people what? Knowledge. Why do you think in verse 9 he called himself the teacher rather than just saying the king? God gave him the wisdom. Along with wisdom and knowledge comes responsibility, right? We don't gain biblical knowledge by studying the Word of God just to feed our own minds. The reason we learn the Word of God is so that we apply it to our lives and then dispense that to others so that they are able to also learn and grow. So with much knowledge comes great responsibility.
Teach our children.
We need to teach our children. What does verse 11 describe for us on how these proverbs are used? The sayings of the wise are like what?
Cattle prods,
What is a cattle prod?
something that moves the cattle in a certain direction.
Okay. Yeah. A cattle prod could actually be a physical instrument. It could be a sheepdog. It could be a wrangler on a horse, steering the herd or the cows or whatever. So cattle prods come in many different forms, but the first thing that always pops into my mind is that zzz, that electric shock stick.
As it says here, painful but helpful. So it
Yeah.
probably isn't.
And notice that no cows are really dying from getting prodded by those cattle prods. In fact, it's an instrument of correction that may at times cause irritation or pain. So think of that when we think about the Proverbs and we read those and we try and understand them. The Proverbs are gentle, sometimes painful reminders of what we should be doing in life.
Well, when you asked what are the Proverbs for, one of the things that came to my mind was to poke other people with them.
Yeah,
And I realized, oh, this is for me.
yeah, exactly. How many times have we heard a sermon on Sunday and said, boy, I wish so-and-so was here to hear that? When really it was us that really needed it. So there are lots of lessons here in Ecclesiastes 12 at the end that point us to the reason we really have the Proverbs, so that we can learn all these different things. Notice he said that he sought them out to set them in order. And so there is some order to the Proverbs. Chapters 1 through 9, Jacob took you through those. Chapters 1 through 9 specifically address what? See how good of students you are now. What did Jacob say that the theme of 1 through 9 was?
Preparation for instruction.
Preparation for instruction? Do we have any A's yet, Jacob?
Stay away from bad women.
Yeah, actually, bad women in 1 through 9, I think Jacob would probably agree with this. It's really not talking about people. It's talking about evil. It's just morphed into the human realm so that we can grasp an idea better and to understand it.
Well, and then it made wisdom to be female to address that.
Again, it's key wisdom, and it's given from the vantage point of an advice from a father to a son, right? Isn't that the way it is laid out? Well, let's look at the argument and style on page number 2 of the book of Proverbs. It's interesting that a proverb does not argue. A proverb does not argue. It assumes. Another way of looking at this is Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 doesn't argue for the existence of God. It assumes the existence of God. So the Proverbs are like that. Secondly, it does not explain, it expresses. So that's why a lot of times the Hebrews would then have all these different discourses and sentences on these proverbs that they would go through and study. These succinct statements offer profound truths in terse, significant, and striking ways. Like that cattle prod, they're meant to get your attention. There was a great American Presbyterian pastor, teacher, and missionary back in the late 1800s. I believe he died in 1911. His name was A.T. Pearson, And he had this to say: what the Psalms are to the devotional life, the Proverbs are to the practical life. How many of us like to go through the Psalms and read through the Psalms? Aren't they great poetry? And they're just ways to lift up your spirit a lot of times, and yet the Proverbs are, in a sense, the same way, but they are not to necessarily lift our spirits, but to provoke our minds to understand practical ways of life. So the literary form of these Proverbs is mostly in the form of couplets. You know what a couplet is. You've got one half of the statement and then the other half of the statement. The two clauses of the couplet are generally related to each other by what has been termed parallelism. There's two L's in the first part of that and one L in the second part. When I was taking Spanish, I would always pronounce this word parallelism. You know the two L's? Elye. So that was a free Spanish lesson. You're welcome. It's been termed parallelism according to Hebrew poetry. Hebrew poetry does not have rhyme or meter as our poetry does. For instance, we like poetry that rhymes. There once was a man from Rome who every day wrote a poem, but try as he might, he couldn't quite get the last line right and short enough so that everybody understood what he was talking about. Okay, that was maybe a bad one, but anyway, you understand how we like it in our English language. That wasn't the same in Hebrew. Hebrew poetry does not have rhyme or meter as our poetry does. Hebrew poetry consists of parallelism of ideas. So to be very poetic, they take one idea and they put it together with another idea. And that's great poetry to them. There are three kinds of parallelism that have been pointed out in the Proverbs. So let's take a look at those three. The first one is called synonymous parallelism. Now you'll want to pay really close attention during this particular point in the lesson, because you're going to have to do a little exercise here later after this to find examples of these on your own. So you actually have to do some study today. I'm really pushing you really hard today. Synonymous parallelism. Here the second clause relates what is given in the first clause. It expresses the same thought in a different way. Here's an example of this. Proverbs 19:29. Someone read that statement for us.
Judgments are prepared for mockers and beatings for the backs of fools.
Okay, the second clause relates to what is given in the first clause. We're talking about judgments, and we're talking about beatings, parallelism. Okay? They're prepared for mockers or fools. So there's a synonymous relationship going on in that couplet. Does everybody see that? Understand that? Okay. The second type of parallelism is called antithetic or contrast parallelism. Here, a truth which is stated in the first clause is made stronger in the second clause by contrast with an opposite truth. Let's take a look at an example of this. Somebody read Proverbs 13:9 for us.
The light of the righteous shines brightly, but the lamp of the wicked is put out.
Okay, so we have a contrast here. We have the light of the who? Righteous. And we compare that with the lamp of the wicked. Okay, so there's a contrast. It's an antithetic parallelism going on here. The first clause is made stronger in the second clause. If you didn't catch it the first time, that the light of the righteous shines brightly, let me say it to you in a different way. The lamp of the wicked is going to be put out. They draw to the same conclusions, but using two different weighted statements that seem to be contrasting. So you can see that the second statement is stating the same truth, but from the opposite point of view by way of contrast. Now, the third type of parallelism that you'll find in the book of Proverbs is this one. Synthetic parallelism. Has absolutely nothing to do with linen, cloth, rubber, any of those different things. That's not the type of synthetic we're talking about. The second clause develops the thought of the first. The second clause develops the thought of the first. Let's look at an example, Proverbs 20, verse 2. Someone read that for us.
The king's terrible wrath is like the roaring of a lion. Anyone that provokes him endangers himself.
Okay, so we have going on here, the thought that's first given, the king's terrible wrath is like the roaring of a lion, being developed even further. You know, that roaring lion, anybody provokes him, endangers himself. So it gives you more information on the same theme. That's called a synthetic parallelism. So now you come to your in-class assignment. You're all so excited, I can tell. I want you to find 2 examples of each of these parallelisms from any verses in chapters 10 through 15. You get to pick, and then list them in those blanks below. So find in chapters 10 through 15, you can start anywhere you want in there. Start going through them, try and find 2 examples of a synonymous parallelism, 2 examples of an antithetic, and then 2 examples of a synthetic. I think it took me all of maybe 6 minutes. What's nice about this is it gives you another way to look at how to study the book of Proverbs. Some of these are easier to find when the 2 clauses are separated by the word but. Some of them are connected by the word and.
And if there's no connector, that is.
Let me give you an example of one that I found. Proverbs 14, verse 7. You tell me which one of these 3 this is. Stay away from a foolish person, you will gain no knowledge from his speech.
Synonymous.
That's actually synonymous. Look at the definition of synonymous. The second clause restates what is given in the first. Stay away from a foolish person. You'll gain no knowledge from a foolish person, is what it's telling you.
To me, that just develops the thought of it, so there's sort of, it could be either one to me.
Yeah?
I can't do this.
12:1. Whoever loves discipline loves knowledge.
Oh, did you go through the whole? Oh, it's 10 through 15.
Yeah, chapters 10 through 15. Yeah. Who asked for 12:1?
I said 12:1. I thought that was something.
I got that one.
Okay, whoever loves discipline loves knowledge, but one who hates correction is stupid. That would be antithetical, wouldn't it? Yeah, that would be.
Oh, it's
Yeah. Whoever loves discipline loves knowledge, but on the other hand, one who hates correction is stupid.
14:4 is one of my favorites.
14:4. Here we go. Where there are no oxen, the feeding trough is empty. But an abundant harvest comes through the strength of an ox.
That's not what mine says.
Go ahead and read yours.
Without oxen, the stable stays clean. That's a whole different thing than the feeding truck is empty. 'Cause
Well, empty means clean,
yeah,
cleaned out. Mm-hmm.
well, yeah.
Yeah.
But that's not what how an oxen makes the stable dirty. It's not because the feeding trough is full.
No, but no oxen are there because there's nothing to eat, and so it's going to be clean there.
No, there's no oxen there because they generate methane.
That is true, but if you want to feed an ox, you'll have to put something out there for them. Otherwise, they won't show up. Is that true?
No,
Oh, they'll show up with no food?
no, they show up when you hit them with a cattle prod.
Yeah, but this had nothing to do with the cattle prod. You've got ulterior motives, I can tell.
Is that antithetic? Is that what Tom was saying? 4?
14:4?
Yeah.
Well, but an abundant harvest comes. If you've got an empty feeding trough, then the cattle aren't going to be happy. They're not going to be around. But if you've got an abundant harvest, which actually is helped because you utilize your ox, and they can come and then eat what's there. So it gives you lots of good information in there because it talks about the ox not being happy, but then you use the ox in the appropriate way, and then they are happy.
No, I'm sorry.
No? They're not happy to eat?
There's nothing to do with the happy ox. There is no ox. A stable without an ox stays clean. It's not happy or sad. There's no ox.
Okay.
But oxen make bountiful harvest.
Yes, that's true.
It's like a garage with no tractor doesn't have oil stains, but a tractor makes a bountiful harvest.
Possibly. That's interesting. I'm not sure it says exactly the same meaning because Solomon wouldn't have understood a tractor at that point in time and oil. So I don't know whether it's totally.
It's a modern translation.
It is. It's good. We can put that in. We can put that in the Tom's Revised Version, right?
Here's one of my favorites.
Okay, go ahead.
10:19. My version says, "Too much talk leads to sin. Be sensible and keep your mouth shut." Every time I read that, I think God's talking to me.
Uh-huh.
He wrote that one for me.
What was that? 10 what?
10:19. That's what mine says. So just keep your mouth shut. And I'm not good at that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not good at keeping my mouth shut.
Yeah, a lot of times the second half of the statement is the ones that we want to really grasp onto. Did anybody find an antithetical one that you want to share?
10:10.
10:10?
10, I got that.
Let me go to 10:10 here. There are a lot of them. Read 10:10 for us.
People who wink at wrong cause trouble, but a bold reproof promotes peace.
Mm-hmm.
That one too. And 11 also underneath it is antithetical.
By the way, have you ever heard that little saying, loose lips sink ships?
Yeah.
That's actually a rewording of the second half of 10:10. So the truth from Solomon through God's inspiration has traveled down to us in another pithy little statement, which is more like I guess you could say a Chinese proverb. It doesn't have a parallelism to it, it just states it succinctly there. Take a look at 15:3. Tell me what you think about this verse.
Synthetic,
It would be synthetic, right? Why?
because it develops the thought of the person.
Mm-hmm. The eyes of the Lord are everywhere, observing the wicked and the good. God sees us all. So, here you go. For the next month and a half or so, go through the book of Proverbs and have at it. Find out whether you think they're synonymous, antithetic, or synthetic. It's another good way then of examining exactly what's being said. Now let's discuss some examples of popular topics in the Proverbs. I don't know, Jacob, did you give them these popular topics?
Yes, some of them.
Okay. I've given us some examples that we can look at together and discuss them. Popular topics include obedience to parents, evil company, impurity, intemperance, which basically is a lack of moderation or restraint, disputations, lying, pride, generosity, sloth or slothfulness, tongue trouble, friendship. Let's take a look at some of these. Somebody read 13:1 for us, obedience to parents.
The wise son heeds his father's instruction, but a scoffer does not listen to rebuke.
It is. It's antithetic. You've got a wise person versus a foolish or a mocking person on both different sides. So a wise son responds to his father's discipline. As parents, when we correct our children, the goal is not completely punishment. It's a teaching opportunity, isn't it?
Yes.
And so what we want to try and do is through discipline, build a correct practice or a correct response, whatever we're trying to get across. So it's not just the action of punishment that is going on with our children, it's teaching them the right way. So a wise son then responds to his father's discipline. But a person who mocks his parents doesn't listen to rebuke. You ever seen those strong-willed kids where you can spank them and they just won't break? They just won't cry. Seems like no matter how hard you can spank, they just won't cry. One of our 3 sons was that way. We could spank him, and boy, he wasn't going to cry.
So what do you do with him?
You find something that hurts him.
Find another way.
Video games.
No, this was even younger than that. No Jell-O tonight. Yeah, find something they like. All right. 15:20. Would somebody read that for us?
Sensible children bring joy to their father, foolish children despise their mother.
Don't you like those 2 different words? What were those words that are describing them there?
Sensible and foolish.
Sensible and foolish. What does that sound like to you as far as a parallelism?
Antithetic.
We have a truth that is stated in the first clause is made stronger in the second. Is that what that is? Or is it contrasting? You've got a wise son contrasted with a foolish man. Okay? So you've got a contrast that's going on there. So what does that lead you to think?
Needs a thought.
Antithetic.
It is antithetic. You've got a good contrast going on there. The wise son brings what?
Joy to their father.
Right. But a foolish man brings what? If we were to put it into those words, what does a foolish man bring?
Shame.
Shame. What other word could we put in there?
Mocking.
Hate.
How does the mother feel?
Very bad.
Let down, bad, pained, hurt. So we could rewrite this in our own little paraphrase. A wise son brings joy to his father, but a foolish man hurts his mother, pains his mother.
Well, why is the sensible bringing only joy to the father and not the mother?
Well, it's again using contrasts. So it can be made stronger.
They should have used the same sex.
Well,
What are you doing? Rewriting?
Solomon's smarter than I am, so that's why he did that. And so,
Well, it shows that it hurts both.
oh yeah, yeah. Because if a son is not wise, will the father be pleased? So it is showing that both parents are going to be affected, whether the choice is good or bad, and that's probably why it has father and mother both in that particular statement. Evil company, 13:20.
He who walks with wise men will be wise, but the companion of fools will suffer harm.
That's right.
You ever seen that in our society around us?
Of course.
Do you watch TV?
A wise person walks with wise people.
I think that's one of the first things your parents tell
Mm-hmm.
you. Stay away from.
What do we tell our kids? Choose your friends wisely.
Right.
Yeah. We get that thought process and inspiration from Proverbs 13:20.
And you can tell right away.
Mm-hmm. 14:12. Somebody read that one for us.
There is a way that seems right to a man, but it ends in the way of death. But its end is not.
Yeah, this is a verse I've used in talking to people who think that they can be good enough to get to heaven on their own. There is a way which seems right to a man, but the end is death. We can think all we want, but that doesn't accomplish the work of Calvary. We think we can do this. We think we can do this. But when we think that way, we're thinking and depending upon self rather than depending on God. It's a great verse. How about impurity? 22:14.
He who is cursed of the Lord will fall into it.
Kind of sounds like what we were talking about with beware of bad women. This verse kind of sounds along those same lines, doesn't it?
And that would be synthetic. Yeah,
There's
that's
bad
what
men,
I'm
too.
Oh, there are bad men too, yes. Yes. We're not being exclusive here. The ESV says that the mouth of forbidden women is a deep pit. Now, that word forbidden actually in the Hebrew is the word strange.
What's the second half of that verse?
He with whom the Lord is angry will fall into it.
Mine says immoral woman.
Let's look at chapter 23, verses 27 and 28.
For a harlot is a deep pit, and a seductress is a narrow well. She also lies in wait as for a victim, and increases the unfaithful among men.
That second verse, the ESV says she lies in wait like a robber. What does that make you think of? Somebody wearing a black mask, got a ski cap on, black gloves. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And increases the traitors among mankind. In other words, brings down society too, because more people then are affected by that in a negative way. One of the things that we always talk about for our society is the number of people who break the laws and seem to profit from it. And so others then who are easily impressed by that seek to find quick fixes and follow along in the same path. And so the number of traitors is increased among mankind because of evil.
And you listen to your parents. My mother always said, don't ever bring shame to our name.
That's wise. It is. Let's look at chapter 20, verse 1. We'll go through some more of these a little bit quicker. Chapter 20, verse 1.
Wine is a mocker, strong drink is a brawler, and whoever is led astray by it is not wise.
That's a pretty strong verse, isn't it?
Yep.
Let me get the right one on mine here. So wine is a mocker. What does that word mocker mean?
Somebody who's loud and contentious and saying foolish things, probably.
I always use this verse in talking with somebody who has a trouble with excess in alcohol, because when it says wine is a mocker, what it means is these type of people are telling me, I need it to relax me. And so they imbibe themselves to a point where they don't become in control, but rather out of control. Sometimes when we think if we can calm ourselves down, we'll be more in control. But really, we're not in control, are we? What's in control? The liquor is. Strong drink is raging.
My Bible says wine produces mockers. Maybe my Bible is a bad Bible.
Yeah, mine says that.
Which version is that one?
What's the difference?
Well, wine is a mocker and wine produces a mocker is the difference.
The same thing.
New Living
Yeah.
New Living Bible or translation?
Translation.
King James Version says wine is a mocker. We could go to many others. They all really mean the same thing. Christian Standard Bible says, or Coleman Standard, wine is a mocker. Go to the ESV, and it says wine is a mocker. So it's...
I'll change mine.
You don't have to. But that's another good reason why we have lots of different translations, and you can avail yourselves to better Bible study by seeing what others have written on these particular things. Generally, pardon?
I think it breeds confusion sometimes.
Well, but if If you're confused, it's because you're probably not studying deep enough to understand that they really do correlate. Because they're all, by and large, drawn from the same set of manuscripts. And every one of these translations that we have available to us, not every one, but most all of them are very trustworthy because they've had people with all these different degrees up here in linguistics that know exactly what they're talking about with the language and how to put it into the common tongue, so to speak. And so they may choose a different wording based on whether they think they should express the ideas of it or literally the words for words. So you have to understand that also.
They don't always do that. My son and I sort of did an experiment years ago on the actual verses. And some of the verses were actually dropped.
Well, that's because you have a difference in...
Somebody that thought they were smarter said, we don't need this.
No, that's not exactly what happened. No, you have the Alexandrian manuscripts, and then you have the Textus Receptus. In 1611, when the King James was developed, the Textus Receptus was the only manuscripts we had at that point in time. The Alexandrian ones were found after that, which didn't include some of the other thoughts that were in the Textus Receptus. So the older ones were actually found later, and so the newer ones actually had more added to it. So the ones that were dropped out were the ones that were not in the newest one, but they might have been parenthetical thoughts from those who were inscribing it.
Sounded to me like they were emphasized to make a point. Some of them.
They could be. For instance, those who are bit by snakes won't die, things like that.
They were, so let's change. It just, I think it breeds some confusion, especially if you're trying to follow word by word.
Mm-hmm. Again,
I get that myself.
if you get into textual criticism and you can understand linguistics and go into it, it's really not as confusing as you think it would be. Again, that's why we have to study. We can't just take people's words for it. We've got to do our own digging and studying. Proverbs 21. Let's do 10:12. Did we look at that one earlier? I don't remember if somebody brought that one up.
10:12.
Mm-hmm.
Hatred stirred up strife, but love covereth all sin.
We really hear the second half of that one repeated quite often, don't we? Love covers a multitude of sins. Have you ever heard that statement? What does the first half say?
Hatred stirs up strife.
Nobody likes to print that on their pretty little verse that they put up on their wall. They just like the second half. But it's true, hatred stirs up strife. You ever get a bunch of people who hate something and they seem so peaceful, don't they? That again would be disputations, lying. 12, 13, and 14. It's not far away. Let's go to that one. Proverbs 12, verses 13 and 14.
The wicked is ensnared by the transgression of his lips, but the righteous will come through trouble. A man will be satisfied with good by the fruit of his mouth, and the recompense of a man's hands will be rendered to him.
So in Proverbs chapter 12 here, we're talking about lying lips. Again, the transgressions of his lips. Basically, it's a snare. It's a trap. So the man is trapped by lying lips. How many times have we told our kids, you know, if you tell the truth, you don't have to keep, lying and making it, yeah. The truth will always remain the same. Lies, generally speaking, morph into different things, don't they? Let's look at pride. Chapter 11, verse 2.
When pride comes, then comes dishonor, but with the humble is wisdom.
What is Solomon telling us here?
Don't be prideful.
Mm-hmm. We should be like Mac Davis and say, "Oh Lord, it's hard to be humble when you're perfect in every way," right? No. Oftentimes when we take credit, we don't realize it, but we're robbing God of the glory that is due to him. Because we are enabled by the Holy Spirit to do in this life. And so God motivates us and helps us through the Holy Spirit. And when we take credit for that, we're robbing God, aren't we? So in a lot of circumstances, pride can be even an idol to ourselves. Isn't that interesting?
I find it interesting that people seem to forget that everything they do or learn came from someone else.
We like to say there's nothing new under the sun. When we prepare to teach or to preach, really, we're building on the history of others before us, because we're looking in the Word of God. Others had, translated that and helped us in that regard. But generally speaking, we want to find out if we're knocking on the right door, and so we go to other different authors and find out, are we thinking this the right way, or are we way off base? And so we're building on the foundations of others. How many of us have used quotations from other people before? All of us probably, right? So we build on the benefits from others. That's true. All right, let's see. Let me see, what have I got here? 19 verse 17.
He that hath pity upon the poor lendeth unto the Lord, and that which he hath given will be paid him again.
Anybody have a different translation of that?
Yeah, if you help the poor, you are lending to the Lord, and he will repay you.
I think the key ingredient in that particular little couplet is the word Lord. Again, the motivation, why do we give to the poor? It's out of the spirit of love and generosity that God has placed within us. And so when we, again, do things in the name of God for his honor and glory, we can expect to be repaid for that. Now, that doesn't mean if you give a poor person a $10 bill, God's going to give you back that $10 bill, or a $20 or a $30. There are no $30 bills. Anyway, it doesn't mean you're going to get that back. But when you stand before Jesus Christ at the judgment seat of Christ, at the bema seat, he's going to say, what have you done for me? And he's going to take our works and he's going to try them by fire. And those things that are left over, we're going to be able to grab those up and give them back to him because we have done them for him. We want to give them back to him again. So those things that we've done in his name for his honor and glory, we're going to be repaid for those. If
we just give to our neighbors and we don't do it in his name. God has made us generous. We love our neighbors. We love God. Do we have to give to our neighbors in his name?
Yes, because it says that if you give so men can see you, you have your reward.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so, people who give, I'm a philanthropist. Okay, you've gotten everything you're going to get. When you go to heaven and say, what about all the stuff that I gave? You got your reward. You told people about it and you did it so that you could be seen.
But you're giving in his name to the church. That rich man gave and whatnot.
Well,
Which example?
What I'm saying is just being a good neighbor.
Let's take it a little bit further. God has given to each of us, through the Holy Spirit, spiritual gifts.
Yes.
One of the gifts that he gives us is a gift of giving. Whether we verbalize this is in the name of God or not, if he enabled you through the Holy Spirit to have that gift of giving, you're doing it unto him.
This is my point.
Mm-hmm. I'm not literally saying you have to say in the name of God.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Motive for giving is very important.
Pardon?
Your motive.
Mm-hmm.
Giving.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not going to give the same.
Mm-hmm.
If I give $10, God's going to give me $20 back.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the way you give. You give out of compassion and love for that person you're giving to.
That's right. So the idea here is when you're giving to someone, if your motivation is in your heart that you're doing it for God's glory and not for your own attention, that's when you'll reap the reward. Does that satisfy your
Yeah.
definition?
When you have the gift of giving, you don't even need a motive. You don't have a motive. You have the gift of giving, and you give freely.
Mm-hmm. But that motivation is given to you from God.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Good. Oh boy, we're not talking about an animal on this one, but let's talk about sloth. Proverbs 12:24.
The hand of the diligent will rule, but the lazy man will be put to forced labor. Interesting, huh?
Do they mean in prison, forced labor?
You could probably, that's what our society probably first thinks of. Well, the hand of the diligent will rule. In other words, be successful. I think that's what it's talking about here. While the slothful will be put to forced labor. In other words, if you're constantly doing, let's put it in this word. Okay, how many of you love weeds? Anybody? Okay.
Some of them, but you gotta get
Weeds can be a real trouble. And if you're not diligent to rule over that situation, you'll find yourself in forced labor eventually, right? Either that or your house is going to look terrible. And if you happen to live in a certain neighborhood, they might even come around and tell you have to do something about that. But anyway, that's really what this is talking about. If you're diligent in what you're doing over your situation, then you're going to be probably successful or happy. While the slothful person, put it off. What is that saying? Why do today what you can put off until tomorrow? That's probably, part of that also.
Or the lazy man will be dependent on others.
Yeah, that's true. Or forced, to do it. For instance, how many of you have, those little zoning restrictions where you have to do, let's say you have to mow your yard. If a slothful person doesn't want to mow his yard, he can just let it go for as long as he wants, right? In those particular types of neighborhoods. Does it work that way? You'll get a letter. You'll get somebody out there mowing your yard, and then you'll get a bill for it. So be diligent. So slothfulness doesn't work out well. Tongue trouble, 10:19. There's a lot of tongue trouble verses in Proverbs.
10:19, that's the one I already read.
That's the one you already read? Okay, let's look at 15:4. We didn't look at that one, I don't think. 15:4.
a wholesome tongue is a tree of life, and perverseness in it breaks the spirit.
Mm-hmm. What kind of tongue did you say that was?
Wholesome.
Wholesome? The word wholesome, soothing, healing is the same idea, okay? Or a gentle tongue. So, in other words, when you use your tongue for healing or soothing, positive things, it's like a tree of life. But perverseness in it breaks spirits. So, the tongue is a great topic, not just found in the Proverbs, but all throughout the Bible. We can find lots of good verses on the tongue. It's hard. It's one of the tiniest parts of the body, but it's one of the hardest ones to tame at times. All right, let's look at one last one, 17:17.
A friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity.
A friend loves at all time, and a brother is born for adversity. What kind of parallelism is this?
The first one.
Synonymous. It's telling us the same thing. It's expanding a little bit upon it on the second part. But what is it talking about in friendship? Basically, a friend loves you no matter what. And if you're on hard times, that friend is going to be there.
All right, the second half, my Bible says, and it may be wrong, and a brother is born to help in time of need.
Yeah, that's mine too.
Brother is born for adversity, time of need.
See, there's a difference. To help in the time of need, but for adversity could be positive or negative. I mean, my brother, we're pretty
I don't think it's talking about antagonism.
Okay.
That's antagonism. That's not adversity. Adversity is an adverse situation that you find yourself in. So that's what adversity is.
So your brother's there to help.
Your brother's
Yeah.
there at a time of crisis.
Mhm.
Your friend is there all the time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. They are.
And a brother can be a friend.
He can. Brother can also be an enemy, right? Hey, did you know that there are references to the Proverbs in the New Testament? We're not going to go through all of these, but I want you to take a look, and you can go through these on your own. This is on the next to the last page, I believe. Yes. There are some indirect references to the Proverbs. I've listed the New Testament verses, and then to the right of it, where you find that thought in the Proverbs. So that's a good thing for you to take some time and just sit down and pour through those. There are indirect references in those first three. There are some direct references in those other ones. So the Proverbs weren't just written by Solomon and forgotten. New Testament writers actually brought to bear a lot of the principles that are found in the Proverbs.
Neil,
Yes.
on the last page, what does the word suzerainty mean? What's that mean?
How about if you wait till we get there?
Oh.
Natalie's looking ahead. Look at her. Let's look at a proper application first, okay? We must be sure to understand that a proverb is not necessarily a promise of a result, but an end that is likely. A good approach is to see Proverbs as a divine book of moral generalities, of rules of thumb, rather than a book of pointed prophecies, physical laws, or contractual obligations. Let's take a look at an example here. We're going to look at Proverbs 22:6. Everybody's heard this verse before. Train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Or from the Christian Standard, start a youth on his way. Even when he grows old, he will not depart from it. So, what does that actually mean? Is that a promise? I've known people who have claimed that to be a promise. I taught my child how to go, and you know what?
Doesn't always work. No.
They're not following that, and it's not my fault. Blah, blah, blah. Many have claimed this verse as a promise of success in child rearing. But looking into the couplet, we must understand that this is actually set up as a suzerainty, or suzerainty. There we go. Suzerainty. A suzerainty is a legal term which talks about contracts or treaties. What you have is you have a greater person or company or country, and then you have a lesser person, company, or country. For instance, a suzerainty treaty set up between two countries. There's the one who is superseding the other one. The other one then has to try and agree to that particular set of rules in order to be able to have peace. So think of it in that terms. So it's a suzerainty, a relationship in which one state or other polity controls the policy and relations of a lesser, while allowing the lesser to have internal autonomy. Think of it in your parenting realm right now, okay? The parents are the greater. The children are what we would call the lesser, okay? We have a certain control responsibility over the children, and then they are then tied to us in response to that. But look at the last part of that. While allowing the lesser to have internal autonomy. Does that mean freedom of choice? If you ever have a child say no, they express their freedom of choice. In other words, it takes two to tango. Have you ever heard that one? We're using all kinds of proverbs in here today. That's not necessarily a proverb from Proverbs, but anyway. The parents are to guide a child in God's way, taking into account the natural tendencies of the child, and then model that way for the child. That's where a lot of the problems come in, where some of these people are claiming that their kids are going to turn out right when do as I say, not as I do.
I heard that one a lot.
Yeah. But still, The suzerainty aspect indicates that the child must cooperate in their own choices for this to actually be successful. So if you train up a child in the way they should go, and they embrace it when they were old, they won't depart from it because that will be their natural inclination. But it takes the acceptance of the child. We had 3 boys, all 3 of them different. I'm sure you've got that same kind of story. And one of them decided that our way wasn't necessarily the way they wanted to go until they explored all other avenues and found out, you know, you guys did do it right. How good is that to hear from a parent or from a child to a parent?
Did they explore the option of the leather strap?
Oh, the leather strap, the wooden spoon, all those, the no jellos. Well, what is the conclusion? As we've studied through Proverbs, chapters 10 basically through 25, when you get into chapters 27 through 31, there are some different authors other than Solomon. There's King Agur, King Lemuel, and some of the Proverbs in 25 and 26 and 27 are compiled by Hezekiah based on writings that he found from Solomon. How many Proverbs did Solomon write? Does anybody?
3,000.
At least 3,000. And how many do we have in the book of Proverbs?
800.
Less than 1,000. So there are other Proverbs that we still don't have, but some of those were then again collected and put into by King Hezekiah. So you can see now that the book of Proverbs can be studied from a few different vantage points. You don't have to just study it verse by verse and try and understand how that relates in that whole chapter, because each proverb can stand on its own. You can look at it from a parallelism standpoint. You can look at it from a topical standpoint. You can try and relate it to your life, your family's life, your relationships with your government, your family, the people around you, your neighbors, whomever. There's all different ways that you can use the Proverbs and use them to your vantage point. And that these small sayings then can have a huge impact on each of us. So it's a book that is worthy of study and consideration and implementation into all of our lives, because it'll make us wise beyond ourselves, because that's what God gave it to Solomon for, so that he would have the wisdom of God.